LiberalViewer presents.
So, welcome to the July 9th edition of LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundup. Thanks for joining me. I picked out the weekends, well, 15, 16, 18. It keeps changing because there was breaking news. So I think it's going to end up being about 17 or 18 clips, depending on whether you count my clip of a clip as a clip that I'm going to show you near the beginning. But I picked them all out. They're the most newsworthy clips, or what should be a really educational, fair use, media criticism, and political analysis show for you all tonight. There's no political comedy from Bill Maher or Saturday Night Live this week, but I have picked out some political comedy made out of the actual news. First, a joke told by a politician that's not very funny, and then maybe some unintentional humor from Senator John McCain, and then, of course, the humor you always get from Fox News bias I'll be showing you as the third clip, and then a little later in the show with the breaking news about Donald Trump Jr. seeking out damaging information about Hillary Clinton. But the main topic, of course, of the broadcast is what was the main topic of all the Sunday morning news analysis shows, Donald Trump's big meeting with Vladimir Putin. I have clips from all the Sunday shows from the big five corporate outlets of ABC, NBC, CNN, CBS, and Fox News, the so-called corporate media here in the United States. I've also put a link down in the video description to this clip list. It doesn't include the two breaking news clips from later after the Sunday shows about Donald Trump's big meeting, but I'll slip those in right after the Reince Priebus clips from Fox News Sunday. And I start off with, like I said, some sort of unintentional political comedy from John McCain. But first, Lindsey Graham tried to make a joke when Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning pointed out that it was his birthday and he was the one person to show up for his birthday. I didn't think this joke was funny. You can let me know what you think after we watch that joke together here.
Only you are willing to spend your birthday with us on Sunday morning. Happy birthday, Senator.
Thank you. I get a reverse mortgage now. Thanks.
Very nice. Okay. When we come back, more on...
I don't know. It seemed like Chuck Todd thought that joke was a lot funnier than it was really. I mean, I'm so old jokes. There are a lot of good I'm so old jokes. I'm having gotten a little older myself. I know a lot of the I'm so old jokes, and now I can get a reverse mortgage. I don't think so. But another political comedy clip I want to show you, or comedy clip, unintentional comedy from John McCain. This is, that was Senator Lindsey Graham there talking to Chuck Todd about his birthday, and this is Lindsey Graham's work husband. I don't know, Lindsey Graham and John McCain are really close in the Senate, and they have a lot of views together. This is John McCain talking about how he prepares to come on these Sunday morning shows, and the last clip I'm going to show is actually this clip in context. That's why I don't know whether this clip counts or not, but I'll tell you why I think this clip is kind of funny after we watch the 10 seconds together here.
I'm preparing myself mentally to be on this show. I said, John, you're not going to get upset. You're not going to get emotional.
And I'll show that clip in context later, but the reason that was funny to me is I kept thinking about John McCain, like before he goes on those Sunday shows, he's like looking in the mirror and he's saying, John, you're not going to get upset. You're not going to get emotional. For some reason, I think of like Marvin the Martian from the old Bugs Bunny card. You are making me very angry. And you'll see there's a Rex Tillerson clip that makes him very angry when I show that clip in context at the end. But the next clip I want to show is one of several, I want to show the Kellyanne Conway clip that I promised in the title. This is about Putin's meeting with Donald Trump. And the way Kellyanne, this is from the supposed media criticism program on Fox News, Media Buzz, with Howard Kurtz, who used to be a media critic for, I think it was for CNN. He used to do Reliable Sources, and I never thought it was a very good program when Howard Kurtz did it. Now when Brian Stelter does it, it's a much better program. He always seemed to be kind of biased for the right, and he's right at home on Fox News, where he asked Kellyanne Conway about why is it that the media is so focused on this Russia story. When will they ever... Well, check out the Chiron while Kellyanne Conway is answering his question from Media Buzz today on Fox News channel over here.
Friday's meeting with Vladimir Putin. The biggest single media issue was President Trump going to bring up Russian hacking, Russian interference in the election? That seemed to be the focal point in the run-up.
And the focal point in the run-up, again, it seemed to be, or some people are saying, you mean the media were saying it should be. That should be a topic of conversation. I heard that 50 times for every one time anybody said, you know, what does President Putin think about Assad's actions gassing his own people? Can we rely upon him, and others for that matter, to help us with North Korea, or to keep an eye on what North Korea is doing now, where they've got an ICBM that seems very different than in the past? Should they be talking about energy? Can they band together, as candidate President-elect and President Trump have suggested? Can Russia and the United States have a role together jointly, Howie, where they are joining together to try to put ISIS in retreat, if not defeat? So why aren't those questions being asked?
More of my conversation with Kellyanne.
And you saw the chyron there. Media questions on Russia, why they never seem to fade. And you'll see that if you watch that entire Howard Kurtz interview, which I put a link down to in the video description to more video from Media Buzz, although they don't actually have the full Kellyanne Conway interview. But he never asked her about the difference between Donald Trump's description, or the Trump administration description of the meeting with Putin, and then the Russian, Foreign Minister Lavrov, his description as to the confrontation on Russian interference with the 2016 election, and whether Trump accepted Putin's denial, or whether he kept pressing on it, whether he was really forceful in public after not being forceful in private. And that's kind of the poll question I've asked that you can answer over here in the by clicking on this little eye here in the corner. But before I get to that more, I want to show you some of the news programs. First, Fox News, how they reported this. Actually, Chris Wallace, the more straight news anchor of Fox News Sunday, he introduced this news piece from their so-called straight news reporter Kevin Corke about the Trump meeting with Putin. And you'll see that Chris Wallace, in his introduction, he actually says Trump seemed closer to Putin than our supposed allies in Europe. But Kevin Corke's news story is really biased and downplays, like I said, the difference between what the Trump administration is saying about the confrontation on Russian interference in the 2016 election, and then what the Foreign Minister Lavrov said about that, and the Russians are saying about it, whether Trump confronted him or accepted Putin's denial. And that's not even brought up in this news story. They do sort of bring up the Donald Trump Jr. breaking news, although they basically bring up the Trump administration PR. The thing about the Kevin Corke story is, if it were written by the press office at the Trump administration, I don't think it would be any different than the Fox News reporter version. Like I said, there's a little bit of a critical intro by Chris Wallace, but that's it, and I'll discuss that with you after we watch it together here.
President Trump is back at the White House after the G20 summit, where he seemed to get along better with Russian President Putin than some of our longtime European allies. So where do we stand now on foreign hotspots, trade, and climate change? And what about a newly disclosed meeting in 2016 between the president's son, Trump campaign officials, and a Russian lawyer? In a few minutes, we'll break it all down with an exclusive interview with the White House Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus. But first, let's bring in correspondent Kevin Corke at the White House with the latest. Kevin.
Chris, no matter how far away the president travels from Washington, for example, the 4,000 miles to Hamburg, Germany, this White House is never terribly far away from the Russian meddling story. It was one of the topics heading into the G20, and it is again coming out of the G20. The president talking about it and tweeting about it once again, this time talking about his meeting with President Vladimir Putin. He tweeted, "I strongly pressed President Putin twice about Russian meddling in our election. He vehemently denied it. I've already given my opinion." Later, the president tweeting on Sunday, "Putin and I discussed forming an impenetrable cybersecurity unit so that election hacking and many other negative things will be guarded." This, as Fox News confirms that Donald Trump Jr. arranged a meeting at Trump Tower during the campaign with a Russian lawyer with connections to the Kremlin. That meeting he failed to disclose on his federal paperwork, but had been noted by other attendees, including Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort. We also heard from the Trump legal team that the person who took part in that meeting may have misrepresented herself and who she worked for, and may in fact have had ties with DNC operatives. Very interesting twist in that story. As for deliverables from the G20 summit, no surprise, the Syrian ceasefire is an obvious one. President tweeting, now's the time to move forward in working constructively with Russia on that. Another deliverable, the announced agreement with China to conduct joint military exercises in 2018, Beijing's obvious attempt to mollify U.S. concerns over the North. On trade and the final communique, which acknowledged America's right to seek more trade equity abroad, Mr. Trump tweeted this Sunday, the G20 summit, a great success for the U.S., explained that the U.S. must fix the many bad trade deals it has made, will get done. And the summation also noted America's decision to back out of the Paris Climate Accord, which it called irreversible. Of course, according to the White House, it's non-binding, and we're out. Chris?
Kevin Corke reporting from the White House.
Now, that Kevin Corke report, you notice when they showed the Donald Trump Jr. story, you have to pay close attention to that story, because I'm going to show you an update of that story from several hours later with the breaking news from New York Times, where they pretend that the idea that Donald Trump Jr. was meeting with this Russian lawyer to get damaging information about Hillary Clinton isn't some breaking new fact that adds to the story. And you notice how they definitely emphasize the idea that, oh, the whole thing was a Democratic dirty trick, and what's the connection between this, the Russian dossier, and you'll see Reince Priebus try to bring that up in the Fox News Sunday interview later. But definitely remember that Kevin Corke report there, because you're going to compare it to the way they reported the breaking news later, that Donald Trump Jr. meeting was actually about getting damaging information about Hillary Clinton, which is basically the collusion story, that the Trump campaign was looking to Russia to get hacked information about Hillary Clinton to help their campaign. I mean, that is collusion right there. That's why it's amazing that I'll show you Fox News downplaying it, but in a few minutes. But first I want to go through the rest of the Sunday morning news analysis stories that they all kind of showed both the Trump meeting with Putin, and unlike that Fox News story, they played up, they all emphasized the differing explanations of what happened during the meeting between Trump and Putin. Fox News downplayed that. And they also all talked about this Donald Trump Jr. story breaking in the New York Times, the amount of information that was available this morning before the breaking news from this afternoon. I'll show you a little later. Here's the NBC version, I think the best version, as usual. Chuck Todd does a great job, and of course his producers and all the people at NBC putting together the story about Trump's meeting with Putin and all the reactions to it and the differing versions of it, and I'll discuss that with you after we watch that story together over here.
Hamilton, no one else was in the room where it happened. The it in this case is Friday's meeting between President Trump and Russia's President Vladimir Putin, which after this photo op took place behind closed doors, which is for the people present, including 2 translators. The big question, how forcefully did President Trump press Putin on Russian interference in the election? The competing accounts from Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov, and later Mr. Putin, has done little to erase doubts about Mr. Trump's eagerness to pursue the issue. Neither did the fact that the U.S. side announced neither sanctions nor skepticism of Putin's ritual denial and insisted it was time to move on. In fact, this morning, President Trump tweeted the following: "I strongly pressed President Putin twice about Russian meddling in our election. He vehemently denied it. I've already given my opinion. We negotiated a ceasefire in parts of Syria, which will save lives. Now it is time to move forward in working constructively with Russia." Still, at a time when the world is facing an unambiguous threat from North Korea's growing nuclear ambitions, it is President Trump's ambiguous relationship with America's chief adversary that has captured so much attention.
Mr. President, did the Russians lie about your meeting yesterday?
On Friday, President Trump finally met face-to-face with the Russian president, who orchestrated a series of cyber attacks to interfere with the U.S. election and boost Trump's campaign.
It's an honor to be with you.
Instead of hostility, the sit-down began with Putin, who kills and imprisons journalists, commiserating with Mr. Trump about the American press, saying, "These are the ones who insulted you?"
There was a very clear
positive chemistry between the two.
Because the meeting took place behind closed doors, without a single Putin skeptic on the American side, we may never know to what degree Mr. Trump pressed Putin on Russian interference in the election. U.S. intelligence agencies concluded 9 months ago with high confidence that Russia interfered. Secretary of State Rex Tillerson argued the president pressed Putin on more than one occasion, but he also made it clear that Mr. Trump was eager to put election meddling in the rearview mirror.
There was not a lot of relitigating of the past.
But Putin himself says President Trump accepted his assurances that Russia was not involved.
He asked me questions, I answered, I clarified, and I think that he was satisfied with my answers.
The fact that he didn't lay out an explicit deterrent calculus that says, Russia, this is what we know that you did. Here is the evidence that you did it. And oh, by the way, this is now going to be publicly reported because I, the President of the United States, have ordered it to be publicly reported. And here are the consequences for it. The fact is, we haven't heard that he did that.
In fact, Tillerson says the U.S. and the Russians will form a working group on election interference. The top Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee said that's akin to inviting the North Koreans to participate in a commission on nonproliferation. Far from pressing Putin in public just 24 hours before his meeting, Mr. Trump yet again questioned whether Russia was even behind the attacks on the United States.
I think it was Russia, but I think it was probably other people and/or countries, and I see nothing wrong with that statement. Nobody really knows.
And he attacked his own intelligence community on foreign soil.
Everybody was 100% sure that Iraq had weapons of mass destruction. And guess what? That led to one big mess.
Joining me now is the former...
So, yeah, I thought that NBC story had, like, at least if you're looking for the dirt on Donald Trump, they pretty much put it all together as to what your concern should be about his meeting with Vladimir Putin. The fact that there were differing accounts of whether Donald Trump in private was, you know, all gung-ho with Vladimir Putin, you interfered in our election, and he brought it up multiple times. They said twice. You'll see Reince Priebus actually says, well, maybe it was even 3 times, although, of course, he wasn't in the room, so he's free to exaggerate. And, I mean, the big question is why after that Warsaw press conference where Donald Trump basically wouldn't even say that he was certain that Vladimir Putin had ordered hacking and interference into the 2016 presidential election in the United States. Why, if he wouldn't say it in public, why would he then be much stronger in private with Vladimir Putin? He basically ruined his own bargaining position by the whole fake news stuff and saying, you know, it could have been Russia, could have been other people, it probably was Russia, and you know, that it doesn't even make sense. Although, if you disagree with me, I put a poll question, like I said, up. You click on the little eye in the corner there, and you can say that why is there a difference between what Donald Trump is saying and what the Russians are saying? Is it because he was actually much stronger in his stance when he was talking to the Russians than he's ever been in public about Russia interfering in our elections? Or maybe he's just trying to sound like he was stronger than he actually was in his discussion with Putin. That's what I think. But I think that NBC report pretty much showed you what you need to know to come to the conclusion. But I'm going to show you a couple other reports to contrast it with. The next one is actually Dana Bash over on CNN State of the Union. She was guest hosting for Jake Tapper. And she has this really long, you know, Jake Tapper usually says the State of the Union is happy or sad, or this time is like deconstructing the Trump-Russia relationship, or again, deconstructing something. It was like so long, I can't even remember what it is. And then you'll see that they have kind of an audio mess up, which I feel good about because I'm not the only one who messes up the clips. I guess CNN can mess up their clips too. They are playing the audio from the B-roll of Donald Trump Jr. when they get to the story, the breaking story about Donald Trump Jr. meeting with this Russian lawyer. And then I'll show a later CNN clip that I think tells you the rest of the story about Donald Trump Jr. looking for damaging information on Hillary Clinton. But first, this is how they dealt with the breaking news from just this morning on CNN State of the Union with Dana Bash over here.
For Jake Tapper, where the State of Our Union is deconstructing talks with the Russians. News this morning of a previously undisclosed 2016 meeting with the Trump team and a high-profile Russian national. This time, it's Donald Trump Jr., who, according to the New York Times, set up a meeting with a Russian lawyer at Trump Tower 2 weeks after his father won the Republican nomination. The lawyer is best known for fighting a law President Obama signed that blacklists Russian human rights abusers. Putin retaliated by banning American families from adopting Russian children. Donald Trump says which was also attended by Trump's son-in-law and advisor Jared Kushner and former campaign chairman Paul Manafort, was primarily about the adoption of Russian children. And President Trump's outside counsel says, we have learned from both our own investigation and public reports that the participants in the meeting misrepresented who they were and who they worked for. Now, the story comes as President Trump touched back down on American soil after his trip to the G20 summit in Germany, where he met face-to-face with the Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time. Let's talk about it with the president's ambassador to the UN.
Nikki Haley. I'm going to show a clip of Nikki Haley a little bit later. That's the president's ambassador to the United Nations that Dana Bash was just introducing there. But you can see that was a shorter clip, a shorter news summary than from NBC's Meet the Press, but had basically the two big breaking stories, the differing opinions between the Trump administration and the Russian government as to what they talked about. And then, of course, the breaking story about Donald Trump Jr. meeting with this Russian lawyer for reasons that, at least this morning when the Sunday morning news analysis Sunday morning news analysis programs were recorded, they did not have the whole story that I'll show you a little bit later. And then the final news clip before I get to the actual interview clips that I want to show you before I get to the breaking news clips on the the other shoe dropping about Donald Trump Jr. This is the ABC This Week with George Stephanopoulos clip. George Stephanopoulos does the same two facts you saw from CNN about the same amount of time. I think they're in reverse order about the meeting between Trump and Putin, and then the breaking news about Donald Trump Jr., which I will discuss with you after we watch that clip together.
Trump is back in Washington this week and back on Twitter, calling the G20 summit a great success. While the European leaders he left are openly warning of new divisions in the Western alliance. And in Moscow, Vladimir Putin and his team touting that first meeting with President Trump as a big win. They say it's put the U.S.-Russia relationship back on track and put those questions about Putin's meddling in our election to rest. One big question this week, does President Trump agree? Here's the second tweet he just sent out. I strongly pressed President Putin twice about Russian meddling in our election. He vehemently denied it. I've already given my opinion. And back here at home, news signs this morning this issue is far from over. As he landed, President Trump greeted by this headline in the New York Times. Trump team met with lawyer linked to Kremlin during campaign. Back in June, just 2 weeks after Trump clinched the GOP nomination, his son, Donald Jr., son-in-law Jared Kushner, and campaign chair Paul Manafort met with a Russian lawyer with ties to Putin at Trump Tower. This meeting had not been disclosed, and it contradicts Trump's earlier denials.
Did you or anyone in your campaign have any contact with Russia leading up to or during the campaign? Nothing at all.
And with that, let me bring in our reporter who asked the question.
And actually, ABC had a good report from Cecilia Vega, their reporter, that I'm not going to show, though down in the video description you can find the full This Week with George Stephanopoulos program if you want to see that report. It gives more details about what was known this morning, but I'm going to show you more details about what was known about this just a couple hours ago when the second shoe dropped from the New York Times on that Donald Trump Jr. story. But first I want to cover the Putin-Trump meeting some more as to what actually happened in that meeting and how it is that the Trump administration officials are trying to spin away the difference in what the Russians said and what Trump said. And here's the Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin over on ABC's This Week with George Stephanopoulos trying to account for the tweets from Donald Trump and how they conflict with what the Russians have said, which I will... Oh, and one thing I wanted to point out, in my video description down there, I said this is the first official meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. I noticed before I started the show, one of my viewers, Isaac, in the preparatory comments said that, sure, they've never met before. And if you actually check out the comments of Donald Trump over the years, there were many times he actually claimed to have met Vladimir Putin before, but this is the first official meeting, and as far as I know, other than from words from Donald Trump's own mouth, which are totally untrustworthy, of course, this is the first meeting between Trump and Vladimir Putin. But thanks, Isaac, for posting that comment. I appreciate all the live viewers who increase my fair use media criticism and political analysis argument by adding your comments to the live program that sort of scroll along the side or along the bottom, depending on how your window is situated. But I appreciate those comments. And like I said, here is the Steve Mnuchin explanation of the conflict between what Trump is saying about his meeting with Putin and what Putin's people, what Foreign Minister Lavrov from the Russian government is saying over in this clip.
The issue of Russian meddling was fully discussed. What we don't know is, does President Trump agree with President Putin? Does he accept President Putin's denials?
Well, George, everybody's focused on that, and what they should be focused on is what was discussed in the substance of the meeting. And let me just say, why would President Trump broadcast exactly what he said in the meeting? Strategically, that makes no sense. What he's broadcast and what he's
already doing that on Twitter this morning. He's just not answering that question.
I got it. Why should he answer that question directly? He's made it very clear how he feels. He's made it very clear that he addressed it straight on. And there was significant substance. This is a very important for us to have discussions on substantive issues, and I think the president handled it brilliantly.
You say he's made it very clear how he feels, but we all saw that press conference earlier in the week in Hamburg where the president said about 3 different things on whether or not Russia meddled. He said, I think it was Russia, I think others did it. No one knows for sure. What is the president's position on whether or not Russia interfered in the election? Does he accept the conclusions of the intelligence community?
I think it was very clear what he said. He said those 3 things, and that's what he believes. But again, what's important here is, what is the president doing? This is a president that's focused on action. And this was a foreign trip where we had very, very significant meetings. This was substance. We had over an hour-and-a-half meeting with President Xi and his team where we focused on trade, economic issues. North Korea, we're following up with a comprehensive economic dialogue with them here in D.C. in July. President Trump is focused on action and getting things done.
So just to be clear, the president does not accept the very clear conclusion of the intelligence community. I want to read it right here. They said, we assessed Russian President Vladimir Putin ordered an influence campaign in 2016 aimed at the U.S. presidential election. The president saying no one knows for sure.
Again, what I would say is the president is focused on strategically negotiating with Putin. And we have some very serious issues to deal with, which are Syria, a ceasefire, that's in both of our interests, and having a no-fly zone, dealing with the issues in the Ukraine, which are very important, dealing with North Korea and the ballistic missile. That's what the president is focused on.
The president also said in his tweets this morning.
So, yeah, that was the Steve Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary for Trump administration, his attempt to answer the question that is pretty much unanswerable as to what it is that Trump actually believes about Russian interventionism. He said that he doesn't accept Putin's denial, but then when George Stephanopoulos followed up, about Trump saying 3 contradictory things, it's the Russians, it's countries other than the Russians. Nobody knows who it is for sure. I mean, I suppose you might try to get all those, if it's the Russians and people other than the Russians and nobody knows for sure exactly who it is, maybe you could square all those. But those all 3 things, at least on their face, are pretty contradictory. But Steve Mnuchin, well, he believes all 3 contradictory things at once. It's like doublethink. I don't know. I guess in the Trump administration, you have to be able to believe 3 contradictory things all at the same time just to function, or that's my conclusion from that clip. You can let me know what you think. Now I'm going to move on to another Trump administration official, the Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus, trying to answer the same question with Chris Wallace. I criticized Fox News Sunday earlier with the Kevin Corke interview. I think Chris Wallace does a pretty good job of trying to follow up on the same questioning you saw from George Stephanopoulos in that last clip about the contradiction between what the Trump administration is saying happened in the meeting between Putin and Trump on Russian interference in our election, and what the Russians are saying, what Trump administration is saying. And here's Reince Priebus trying to square that circle, but listen for the word probably. Reince Priebus saying the word probably. That's his big wiggle, his weasel word in the, this is about a minute and 45 seconds here.
Speaking of foreign policy meetings, what really happened in the Putin-Trump summit in Hamburg on Friday. Russian Foreign Minister Lavrov says that after Putin denied meddling in the election, he, Trump, this is his quote, said that he accepts these assertions and that President Trump said, this is Lavrov quoting Trump, certain circles in the U.S. are still exaggerating, although they cannot prove this, the topic of Russia's interference with the U.S. election. Reince, is that true? Did the president say what Lavrov says he said?
No, it's not true. The president absolutely did not believe the denial of President Putin. What the president did is he immediately came into the meeting, talked about Russian meddling in the U.S. election, went after that issue at least 2 separate times. This was not just a 5-minute piece of the conversation. This was an extensive portion of the meeting. And after going at it with President Putin more than once, 2 times, maybe even 3 times, the president, at that point, after spending a large part of the meeting on the subject, moved on to other topics.
So to be clear,
like Syria
he does not,
and ISIS and
we're going to get to that. He does not accept Putin's denial. He believes the Russians meddled.
He's answered this question many times. He said they probably meddled in the election. They did meddle in the election. The one thing that he also says, which drives the media crazy, but it's an absolute fact, is that others have as well. And that's true. China has, North Korea has, and they have consistently over many, many years. So, yes, he believes that Russia probably committed all of these acts that we've been told of, but he also believes that other countries also participate.
Let's move to the next subject, which is what is the response? What are the consequences?
So, I don't know. That still didn't seem, I mean, it's not as good as Trump himself giving an answer. And did you see the strategic use of the word probably? First he said they probably did, they did, and then later on he said he believes they probably did. But, you know, he's got the probably in there. He did, you know, China did, North Korea did. Everybody's trying to meddle in our election. So it's sort of like they did, but so did everybody else, and lots of people have been doing it for a long time. And why are you so focused on Russia, Russia, Russia? Well, of course, the reason that focus has continued is because of all these weird meetings between Trump administration officials or Trump campaign officials or Trump inner circle people and people from the representatives from Russia. And the latest example of that possible collusion is this breaking story that was already breaking this morning about Donald Trump Jr. meeting with this Russian lawyer who supposedly about Russian adoptions. That was the story this morning. And actually, you'll see this next clip I have is Reince Priebus talking to Chris Wallace, he says, well, you know, I don't really know much about it except that I just talked to all the people who were in the meeting, which is Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner. Reince Priebus talked to all of them before he gives the answer you're about to see, and he doesn't say anything about damaging material about Hillary Clinton, that being the reason for the meeting, which is what broke later in the afternoon. So knowing that that's what broke later in the afternoon, I think puts a whole new spin on Reince Priebus's fairly dishonest answer. I mean, either he's being dishonest about what he was told by Donald Trump Jr., or Donald Trump Jr. did not give him all the information he needed when he went out on Fox News Sunday this morning. We can talk about that after we watch that clip and before I show the breaking news clips from a few hours later. This is the Fox News Sunday clip here.
Start with the breaking news that in June of 2016, there was a previously undisclosed meeting, and let's put up all the players on the screen. Donald Trump Jr., this was during the campaign, Jared Kushner, the president's son-in-law and a senior advisor, and then campaign chairman Paul Manafort met at Trump Tower with a Russian lawyer with ties to the Kremlin, Natalia Veselnitskaya. Why did they meet, and why are we just learning about it?
Well, first of all, Chris, I don't know much about it other than what I've communicated with various members there on the screen. It was a very short meeting. It was a meeting apparently about Russian adoption. And after about 20 minutes, the meeting ended, and that was the end of it. And as far as non-disclosure, look, Jared Kushner put in his disclosure a little prematurely. He's since amended it. All of that is disclosed, and it was a nothing meeting. And now, what's developing from that meeting, if you look at the article that Circa put out, is that the individual that set up the meeting may have been affiliated with Fusion GPS, which is an opposition research firm that is being subpoenaed and talked to by the Senate Judiciary Committee about their role in putting together that phony dossier that people know about in regard to the president. So this is a developing story. I don't know much about it other than it seems to be on the end of the Trump individuals, a big nothing burger, but may spin out of control for the DNC and the Democrats.
Well, let me ask you about two aspects of that. In terms of the DNC, are you suggesting that this was somehow a setup by Democrats to try to link them or compromise them with the Russians? And this was before there was any Russian interference in the election, so why would they have done that?
Well, look, why was Fusion GPS involved in putting together this dossier? I don't know, Chris, and I don't think too many people know why or how this meeting came about. However, what I can tell you is from my communication with our team on this subject, there was nothing to it. It was a 20-minute meeting. It ended after everyone was decidedly sitting there saying there's nothing happening here. They moved on. And I think in the end, what you're going to find in this story, if you read the Circa column, is I think there's more questions on the Democrat side than anywhere else.
And one last question about the meeting. Why would Donald Trump Jr., Jared Kushner, and campaign chairman Paul Manafort all want to meet with a Russian lawyer about Russian adoption?
Listen, I have no idea, Chris. You're going to have to talk to them. However, you know, talking about issues of foreign policy, issues related to our place in the world, issues important to the American people like adoption is something that's not unusual. So when you go through a campaign, you're not just talking to one particular group of people about, in this case, adoptions in Russia. You have policy teams talking about our place in Asia, talking about trade in China. You have policy teams that run the gamut.
So this was a foreign policy meeting?
Apparently so.
Okay. I want to clear up, speaking of...
Okay. That was Reince Priebus's basically bullshit answer about the Donald Trump Jr. meeting. You know, why would all those people want to meet this Russian lawyer to talk about adoption? You know, after the United States put sanctions on human rights violators in Russia, Russia decided to stop all adoptions by American parents of Russian babies. And supposedly that's what the meeting was all about. And Reince Priebus said at the beginning of that clip, you saw that he talked to Jared Kushner, he talked to Donald Trump Jr., even Paul Manafort. He talked to all of them, and supposedly he had all the information. But the big missing fact was the reason they had that meeting was because they were looking for damaging information about Hillary Clinton from a supposed Russian source. And that's evidence of possible collusion on Russian interference in our election. And that was the big breaking story from the New York Times later today. First, I'm going to show it from CNN with live news with Ana Cabrera. Their breaking news. This is from about 6 p.m. Pacific time. About 3 p.m. Pacific time, 6 p.m. Eastern time on CNN. And then I'm going to contrast this from the Kevin Corke report on Fox News Sunday, which pretends the breaking news isn't even breaking news. But here's the breaking news on the Donald Trump Jr. meeting with this Russian lawyer from CNN this afternoon here.
CNN breaking news.
You're live in the CNN newsroom. I want to welcome our viewers in the United States and around the world. I'm Ana Cabrera in New York. Thanks for being with us. We have this breaking news into CNN. The New York Times reporting right now that Donald Trump Jr. met with a Russian lawyer after being promised damaging information on Hillary Clinton. Now, this is the first public indication that at least some in the Trump campaign were willing to accept Russian help. Donald Trump Jr. has provided CNN with the following statement. I quote, "I was asked to have a meeting by an acquaintance I knew from the 2013 Miss Universe pageant with an individual who I was told might have information helpful to the campaign. I was not told her name prior to the meeting. I asked Jared, as in Jared Kushner, and Paul Manafort to attend, but told them nothing of the substance. We had a meeting in June 2016 after pleasantries were exchanged The woman stated that she had information that individuals connected to Russia were funding the Democratic National Committee and supporting Ms. Clinton. Her statements were vague, ambiguous, and made no sense. No details or supporting information was provided or even offered. It quickly became clear that she had no meaningful information. She then changed subjects and began discussing the adoption of Russian children and mentioned the Magnitsky Act. It became clear to me that this was the true agenda all along and that the claims of potentially helpful information were a pretext for the meeting. I interrupted and advised her that my father was not an elected official, but rather a private citizen, and that her comments and concerns were better addressed if and when he held public office. The meeting lasted approximately 20 to 30 minutes. As it ended, my acquaintance apologized for taking up our time. That was the end of it, and there was no further contact or follow-up of any kind. My father knew nothing of the meeting or these events. I want to bring in CNN Global Affairs correspondent Elise Labott, who's following this breaking news. Elise, help us understand just how significant this is.
Well, Anna, it's significant because it's the first early indication that we had that Russian nationals, whether they're in the government, whether they're anywhere, were actually trying to reach out to the Trump campaign. Now, Donald Trump Jr. says that an acquaintance from that Miss Universe pageant was trying to set him up with this woman, and he didn't know who it was. But I think it's important to note that that Miss Universe pageant in 2013 was held in a suburb of Moscow. And I mean, I think it's also curious, why are we just hearing about this now? The meeting was in June of last year, and we're just hearing about it. So if it was concerning to Donald Trump Jr., you would think that he might have passed along that Russians were trying to at least reach out to the campaign, but we're just hearing about it now.
Explain why the conversation.
So there you see from CNN the looking at the real import of this breaking news. It's indications of possible collusion between the Trump campaign, between Donald Trump's son, Donald Trump Jr., and a Russian lawyer trying to get damaging information on Hillary Clinton. I mean, that is huge news if true, and Donald Trump Jr. is kind of admitting that's what enticed him into this meeting, and the whole adoption thing, that's what and the Magnitsky Act, which is the sanctions on human rights abusers in Russia, that Russia retaliated with this ban on American couples adopting in Russia. That was turned out to be the real reason for the meeting, but that's not what enticed Donald Trump Jr. way back in June 2016. That is like, I don't know if it's a smoking gun, but that's huge news. And what is amazing about this huge news, if you're like a Fox News viewer, and that's where you get your news, what you would see is pretty much the same report I showed it. If you're following along on the clip list, it's clip 4, the Kevin Corke story I showed from Fox News Sunday. They basically, at 6 p.m. Eastern, 3 p.m. Pacific, the same time I just showed that breaking news from CNN, they showed that same Kevin Corke story with all the same coverage of Putin's meeting with Donald Trump, and how the media was focused on what they talked about in terms of the intervention in the election, but what we should really focus on is the deliverables. As Kevin Corke talked about, the whole Syria ceasefire, which I'll talk about at the end when I show the John McCain clip I promised. But then at the end of the updated version of the Kevin Corke story from clip 4, this is Kevin Corke reporting the breaking news that Donald Trump Jr. met with this Russian lawyer seeking out damaging information from the Russians on Hillary Clinton, but he sort of like just folds it in as if, oh, we already, that's nothing to see here. And the real story, of course, is, again, maybe this woman was connected to some sort of dirty trick from the Democrats or dirty tricks from the Hillary Clinton campaign. And that's the minute and 10-second story. This is, like I said, at the end of a longer story, very similar to clip 4 that I showed you earlier. This is Kevin Corke from Fox American News headquarters on Fox News this afternoon here.
Say it is non-binding, and that's why we are not going to be a part of that. Now, I also want to share this. It's a very interesting story we've been following. You may have read about this in the New York Times. We're getting more reaction tonight by Donald Trump Jr. to a story in the Times that suggested that he and others from the campaign met with a Russian lawyer last summer hoping to score some intel about the Hillary Clinton campaign. He's actually issued a statement that reads in part that the meeting lasted 20 to 30 minutes. The woman who was the attorney in the meeting, she claimed to know of individuals connected to Russia who were funding the DNC. She made statements that were vague, ambiguous, and made no sense. He also goes on to add that the president neither attended nor knew anything about that meeting. Now, in case you hadn't heard this, he apparently failed to disclose that meeting in his federal paperwork, but it had been mentioned by two others who attended the meeting, Jared Kushner and Paul Manafort, who, of course, did manage the campaign for a while. But the real question remains, who was this person that asked for this meeting, and did a Democratic operative put her up to it? That is a story we'll continue to watch, of course, right here on Fox News. But for now, back to you,
Kevin Clark.
So the story they're going to continue to watch on Fox News is, was someone from the Democrats behind this whole Russian lawyer talking to Donald Trump Jr., and they, like I said, they just sort of like, oh, by the way, it was all about getting damaging information about Hillary Clinton from the Russians, which Donald Trump Jr. never disclosed, and this is the first time we've ever heard about it, but we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to sort of slip that fact in as if it's not breaking news. The breaking news is it could be Democrats behind the whole thing. Well, anyway, I had to slip those two breaking news clips in, which aren't on the clip list, but now I'm going to return to the clip list. We're going back to clip 11. This is actually Lindsey Graham saying, making another kind of joke. I showed at the beginning Lindsey Graham making a joke about his birthday. Now he's eligible for a reverse mortgage. Not a very funny joke, but this is actually a little bit better, where he talks about the idea of, this is the other idea that came out of the Trump-Putin meeting, that Donald Trump is now saying that Putin agreed that Russia will work with us on some cyber attack task force that will guard us all against cyber attacks. And according to Lindsey Graham, that is not the dumbest idea ever, but and well, I'll talk about that after we watch that clip. This is from NBC's Meet the Press. Chuck Todd talking to Lindsey Graham about Trump's tweets about how Russia and the United States are going to create an impenetrable barrier against hacking in the future. Over here.
With Russia and the president and this cybersecurity statement he put out there, he wants to work with Vladimir Putin, claiming that this cybersecurity unit will prevent future election hacking and many other negative things will be guarded. What say you, sir?
It's not the dumbest idea I've ever heard, but it's pretty close. He gave a really good speech in Poland, President Trump did, and he had what I think is a disastrous meeting with President Putin. 2 hours and 15 minutes of meetings. Tillerson and Trump are ready to forgive and forget when it comes to cyber attacks on the American election of 2016. Nobody's saying, Mr. President, the Russians changed the outcome. You won fair and square, but they did try to attack our election system. They were successful in many ways, and the more you do this, the more people are suspicious about you and Russia. He's got a great national security team around him. He's doing a good job in Afghanistan, North Korea, and ISIL, but when it comes to Russia, he's got a blind spot, and to forgive and forget when it comes to Putin regarding cyber attacks is to empower Putin, and that's exactly what he's doing.
Well, here we are, though. You have said similar things before. Other Republicans have said similar things before, that he only invokes more suspicion. Right. What he did this morning, is he putting more faith in Putin's word than in the word of the American intel community?
I wouldn't look at it that way. He seems to be willing to forgive and forget Putin. Even if he brought it up, he's not willing to do anything about it. So it makes me more committed than ever to get sanctions on President Trump's desk punishing Putin. There's only one person in Washington that I know of that has any doubt about what Russia did in our election, and it's President Trump. And I hate that, because I really like what he's doing regarding North Korea, putting them on notice about no missile will ever be used to hit America. I like what he's doing in Afghanistan. He took on Assad. He's got a good plan regarding ISIL. But when it comes to Russia, I am dumbfounded. I am disappointed. And at the end of the day, he's hurting his presidency by not embracing the fact that Putin's a bad guy who tried to undercut our democracy, and he's doing it all over the world.
You know, Lindsey Graham almost had me till he started agreeing with other Donald Trump foreign policy in Afghanistan and what was that, North Korea. But the whole idea that I think Lindsey Graham had some good criticisms there at the beginning. Like I said, it's not the dumbest idea ever, but it's one of the dumbest, and that's actually a better joke, I think, than the clip I showed at the beginning where Lindsey Graham was trying to say that his birthday meant that he's now qualifies for a reverse mortgage. Not so funny. And I want to show one more Republican. Actually, I should have put this clip a little earlier, but this is the UN ambassador for the Trump administration, Nikki Haley, also trying to justify the Putin government, the Russian government, denying or saying that Trump accepted Putin's denial of interference in the 2016 election, and trying to square that with what the Trump administration is saying. And I don't think Nikki Haley does that great a job. This is from CNN State of the Union, Dana Bash, and you'll see that, well, let's watch that clip together, and then I'll tell you why I think Nikki Haley is really dodging and not answering Dana Bash's question over here.
Ambassador Haley, there were conflicting reports about what happened inside President Trump's much-anticipated meeting with President Vladimir Putin. The Russian foreign minister, Sergei Lavrov, said that President Trump heard and, quote, accepts Putin's very clear statements that Russia did not interfere in the U.S. election. Is that true?
Okay, so I think we need to all step back and just look at what we wanted to have happen. We got two very important leaders together and said, okay, it's time for them to meet. This was a long time coming. What we know is that when President Trump meets with a leader, things do start to move. So from my standpoint, and a lot of the administration, it was important. What he did was bring up right away the election meddling, and he did that for a reason. One, he wanted him to basically look him in the eye, let him know that, yes, we know you meddled in our elections. Yes, we know you did it, and cut it out. And I think President Putin did exactly what we thought he would do, which is deny it. And I think that is what it is. They're going to always have two different stories on this. They're going to always have two different stances on this. But at the end of the day, what was most important was for President Putin to hear from President Trump, we know you did this. We didn't like it. Don't do it again.
I want to play what the president himself said about Russia and interference and casting doubt on the fact that they were really behind the election hack. Take a listen.
Okay. I think it was Russia, but I think it was probably other people and or countries. And I see nothing wrong with that statement. Nobody really knows. Nobody really knows for sure.
Now, Ambassador Haley, that was just a couple of days ago. Nobody really knows for sure. With statements like that, can you understand why the Russians, at least they say that they took what they took from President Trump's private statements to Vladimir Putin?
You know, what I understand is that President Trump let him know that, look, we know you did this, and cut it out. And President Putin is never going to admit that they did it. And so they have to come back and they have to defend themselves. This is Russia trying to save face. And they can't. They can't. Everybody knows that Russia meddled in our elections. Everybody knows that they're not just meddling in the United States elections. They're doing this across multiple continents, and they're doing this in a way that they're trying to cause chaos within the countries. And it's not just going to be us saying this. I think you're going to hear other leaders come out and say, cut it out. We're not going to put up with it.
But you said everybody knows that the Russians meddled in the U.S. election, and that the president said so behind closed doors to Vladimir Putin. If that's the case, why won't the president say this in public? It would put a lot of these questions, and frankly, the fact that a lot of your fellow Republicans are perplexed, it will put it all to rest. Why won't he do it?
I think that you can ask him. I mean, I think that, that's one of the things, let him say this. We heard a lot of people saying that about Article 5 and NATO, that why didn't he say it? Why didn't he say it? He didn't say it then because he wasn't changing policy. So you heard this when he was in Poland give a fantastic speech, and he said that he supported Article 5, and he said that he supported our NATO allies. And so I think, everybody's trying to nitpick what he says and what he doesn't, but, talk is one thing, actions are another. He confronted President Putin. Well, he made it the first thing that he talked about, and I think we have to now see where it goes from here.
Right, but as a chief diplomat, that talk is very important because it sends a signal, and I would love for reporters to be able to ask the president, but he's not doing any press conferences. But let's move on to one thing that you mentioned, which is aside.
So kudos there to Dana Bash on CNN State of the Union, the guest host for Jake Tapper this morning, for making it pretty clear that when Nikki Haley gives the strong statement that everybody knows Russia meddled in our election, that's not what Trump's saying. That's not what he said before he met with Putin in that news conference in Warsaw. And at least to me, it makes no sense that Putin would, in public, be weak about Russian interference, but then when he actually got in private with Putin, he would be stronger. But like I said, I have a poll question over here that you can answer, and you can tell me if you agree that the difference between what Trump is saying and what the Russians are saying about what happened in their discussion on Russian interference in our election, is that because Trump was actually stronger in private than in public, or he's exaggerating how strong he was in private, which I think it's definitely the latter, but you can let me know what you think. I think Dana Bash did the best job of any of the interviewers of pointing out that Donald Trump is not saying what all the spinners from his administration are saying, that, that Russia interfered in our election, and Donald Trump confronted Putin on that vigorously and did not accept Putin's denials. That seems more like what, I hate to believe the Russian foreign minister over the President of the United States, but I have to say the President of the United States doesn't have a big track record of honesty based on many statements he's made on many subjects over the last year and a half. It's a sad, sad state of affairs to be an American and have Donald Trump as your president. But I'm just here reporting it to you. And that denial by Nikki Haley was also scoffed at pretty much by one of the lead Democrats, who is a spokesperson on this whole Russian interference issue. That's the ranking Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, Adam Schiff. He was over on CNN State of the Union with Dana Bash also, and he appeared after Nikki Haley, and he basically responded to that bogus argument you just heard from Nikki Haley after an introduction from Dana Bash, and I'll discuss that clip with you after we watch it together over here.
Welcome back. The president woke up on American soil this morning after returning from the G20 summit, where he met with Russian President Vladimir Putin for the first time. Both sides have given conflicting accounts on the over 2-hour meeting, with the president just tweeting this morning, "I strongly pressed President Putin twice about Russian meddling in our election. He vehemently denied it." And he gave the opinion, "We negotiated a ceasefire in parts of Syria, which will save lives. Now it is time to move forward in working constructively with Russia!" Exclamation point. Joining me now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California, the ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. And Congressman, you just saw the president's tweet. He wants to move forward in the face of Putin's denial. What's your response?
Well, my response is, how can we really believe that the president pressed Putin hard when only the day before he was denying whether we really knew Russia was responsible? What kind of a tough negotiator, and this is the way the president likes to portray himself, goes into a negotiation betraying his own position the day before, calling into question the probity of his own intelligence agencies? That just doesn't make any sense. And then to say, okay, it's been resolved, now we can move on. I don't think we can move on. I don't think we can expect the Russians to be any kind of a credible partner in some cybersecurity unit. I think that would be dangerously naive for this country. If that's our best election defense, we might as well just mail our ballot boxes to Moscow. I don't think that's an answer at all.
I want to talk about cybersecurity in a minute, but are you saying that the president is not telling the truth about what happened in that private meeting?
I'm saying that as much as I like Nikki Haley, she wasn't in the room any more than I was, and it just strains credulity to think that the president took such a very different position privately with Vladimir Putin than he took publicly the day before. Why on earth would you do that? Why would you go into that negotiation and so undermine your own position? We're, I guess, meant to believe that he's much stronger in private than he's willing to be publicly, but why does that make any rational sense? On the contrary, if he was really determined to press Putin, he would have gone into that meeting and said unequivocally, this is what Russia did. Even by an account from the Secretary of State, apparently the president asked Putin whether he did it. He didn't go in there and confront him and say, as Nikki Haley would suggest, and we would all love to believe, we know you did this, you have to stop. It's just really hard to imagine given what he said only hours earlier.
You mentioned cybersecurity. I want to put a
So there you have Representative Adam Schiff, generally on this issue, someone who I think is a leader and someone who's making the strongest arguments, making the argument that I was making earlier, that it just doesn't make sense that Donald Trump would be stronger in private talking to Vladimir Putin about his interference in the American elections than he was in public just hours before in that Warsaw press conference saying, you know, it could have been Russia, it could have been other people, nobody knows for sure, and it just strains credulity, as Adam Schiff said. And if you disagree with me or if you agree with me, you can answer the poll question. Basically, like I said, that's the poll question for this week. It's at this little eye here you can click on in the corner. And I have one more Adam Schiff clip from CNN's State of the Union. This is on the Donald Trump Jr. meeting with this Russian lawyer, and this is before the later news broke about it that Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner were enticed into this meeting in June 2016 based on the idea that Russians were going to provide them damaging information about Hillary Clinton. I mean, that basically is collusion right there. And that's not even part of this question from Dana Bash to Adam Schiff as to whether the Intelligence Committee is going to seek testimony from the people who participated in this June 2016 meeting over in this clip.
Ask about something the New York Times is reporting this morning, that Donald Trump Jr., Paul Manafort, and Jared Kushner met at Trump Tower last June, again during the campaign, with a lawyer who is a high-profile Russian national. The president's eldest son told the newspaper that the meeting was primarily about an adoption program. Does this story raise questions for you?
It certainly raises questions for a variety of reasons. Of course, the president's son had denied having any kind of meetings like this. They claim that this meeting had nothing to do with the campaign, and yet the Trump campaign manager is invited to come to the meeting. And there's no reason for this Russian government advocate to be meeting with Paul Manafort or with Mr. Kushner or with the president's son if it wasn't about the campaign and Russia policy. Obviously, they were trying to influence one of the candidates, the leading candidate at that time, on the Republican ticket. So what we've heard thus far doesn't make much sense. What we just heard from the spokesman for the president's lawyer, suggesting somehow that this was contrived, maybe by Hillary Clinton, also doesn't make sense. So yes, we need to get to the bottom of it.
And does getting to the bottom of it mean potentially calling Donald Trump Jr. before your committee, which is investigating this?
You know, I think we're going to want to question everyone that was at that meeting about what was discussed. You know, by trying to frame it as about adoptions, it ignores what it sounds like the meeting may have really been about, and that is the Magnitsky Act, which is legislation, very powerful sanctions legislation that goes against Russian human rights abusers. So if this was an effort to do away with that sanctions policy, that is obviously very significant. If they're talking to the president's team, the then candidate Trump's team, that contradicts, of course, what the president and his people have said about whether they were meeting with any representatives of the Russian government.
Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much for joining me this morning.
Thanks, Dan.
And that was before we even knew that this meeting was about getting damaging information about Hillary Clinton from the Russians. Can you imagine what Adam Schiff would have said if that was part of the conversation this morning? So I think the Democrats and the people like Adam Schiff are going to go hog wild on that this week. That I mean, it's basically it's not evidence of collusion between Donald Trump and the Russians, but Donald Trump Jr. and the Russians. Yes, collusion between, or evidence that Donald Trump Jr. was seeking damaging information about Hillary Clinton from a representative of the Russians, although now he's saying, well, we didn't know who the person was, and maybe it was a whole, like, dirty trick by the Democrats. Well, I guess we'll find out, but it's just more grist for the mill, more incidents to add to the many suspicious incidents that we're trying to figure out. Why are all these Trump administration officials having all these meetings with representatives from Russia if there's no collusion between the Trump campaign and the Russian hacking of the DNC and the Russian attempt to influence the 2016 election? Why are all these contacts undisclosed, secret meetings? I don't know. You can let me know what you think down in the comments section. I find it all very suspicious. I'm not drawing conclusions, but I'm keeping an open mind, but I'm still not saying there's nothing there, because there seems to be more there every single week. You can let me know what you think, like I said. And now I want to move on to another sort of counterpoint to the Trump administration deceptions or lies or whatever you want to call it on the whole Russian interference in the election. This is the claim that, well, Obama didn't do anything. That's one of the weird claims from Trump lately, is there was no Russian interference in our election, and when Obama found out about it, he didn't do anything. It's like one of these contradictory arguments that, or it's two contradictory arguments that Donald Trump is making, and he often does that, where, you know, it doesn't have to make sense because his supporters don't care if it makes sense, but he's arguing there was no Russian interference in our election for sure, and when Obama found out about it in August, he didn't do anything about it, so it's his fault. And here's John Brennan, the former CIA director of the CIA at the end of the Obama administration, responding to the idea that, I think this was a Washington Post article where some anonymous CIA or other intelligence official said, we choked on this, we didn't do enough. And of course John Brennan attacks the anonymous source as, how brave to be an anonymous source, but I think there might be something to this criticism, and I will discuss that with you after we watch that clip of John Brennan talking to Chuck Todd on NBC's Meet the Press this morning over here.
When it was finally exposed and you met with folks and there was a debate about what to do, obviously there's been a TikTok, and one of the infamous quotes out there in the Washington Post TikTok on what happened in the end of the Obama term. And this is what one anonymous Obama official said. "It is the hardest thing about my entire time in government to defend," said a former senior Obama administration official involved in White House deliberations on Russia. "I feel like we sort of choked." The idea is that enough wasn't done before the election, and I understand the political impact of that, but there's been complaints that enough wasn't done after the election. What do you say to that? Did you choke?
That was a really brave comment by an anonymous source. They should be willing to say that on the record, first of all. No, I don't believe that the Obama administration choked. I think we can look at the actions that were taken prior to the election and after the election. I confronted my main Russian counterpart on August 4th and told him, if you go down this road, it's going to have serious consequences, not only for the bilateral relationship, but for our ability to work with Russia on any issue. Because it is an assault on our democracy. President Obama confronted President Putin in September. Jim Clapper and Jay Johnson announced publicly in October about Russian efforts. So after we did that, I wonder whether or not the Russians then took a step back and said, wait a minute now, we're not going to be as aggressive as we may have been otherwise.
Did you see evidence of that?
Well, I didn't see evidence that they continued to do some of the things that we were concerned about, such as manipulating election tallies and other types of things. They were mapping the architecture of a lot of the state systems, so they could have done more. They didn't do more. I don't know whether or not the things that we did vis-a-vis the Russians had an impact on them in terms of not pursuing it.
Let me ask about the issue of leaks.
I don't know, the last part of that where he's claiming, oh, you know, we told them to, you better cut this out, and they may have done less. I don't know. I've seen a lot of coverage about that on MSNBC, and I mean, I suppose it's possible that there's this idea that when you show publicly discovery of an intelligence operation, that means that it's no longer an effective operation, like, because they were trying to sow chaos. You know, nobody knows why the election is so messed up, and once we know that there's Russian attempts to interfere with our election, then Russia knows they can't get away with it without people knowing who it was, and that kind of ruins the whole thing. And so I think that's what John Brennan was arguing there, that somehow by publicly exposing, and you know, the other things that, you know, that they went to Congress, and then they publicly exposed what Russia was doing, and we told them to cut it out, that we didn't choke, we actually did stuff, and maybe it had an effect. I don't know. The effect part, that's, I don't know. I don't know if I don't know enough about it, but you can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And before I finish up, and I am going to have like a quick, I saw some people mentioning Sandy earlier, and so I will have a quick Sandy close-up in portrait mode, which is supposedly going to give you depth in the picture. I don't know if it really has depth, but that's what the iPhone 7 is supposed to give you, depth in the portrait mode. You can let me know what you think after I show you the next clip, because I'll show the Sandy picture at the end. But this is John McCain in the full clip, where I showed you that 10-second clip at the beginning where John McCain was saying, yeah, I'm looking in the mirror. Well, he didn't say looking in the mirror, but before I come on the show, I say to myself, I'm not going to get upset. I'm not going to get emotional. Or I was saying Marvin the Martian, you are making me very angry. That what made him so angry? Well, it was a quote from Rex Tillerson, and you can see before John Dickerson even gets to finish the question, he like jumps in, is like, can you believe that? I can't even believe that. But I don't think he actually got that upset or emotional. So maybe looking into the mirror and telling himself to not get upset and emotional is working for him. This is John McCain talking. This is actually one of the supposed successes from Trump's meeting with Putin, the Syria ceasefire. But there was something about the way they talked about Syria that was actually kind of disturbing. And the beginning part where John McCain talks about that, I agree with. And then at the end where he's talking, I'll tell you why I disagree with John McCain after we watch that 2-minute clip from CBS's Face the Nation this morning here.
There you go. I want to ask you about Syria. Let's listen to something that Secretary of State Tillerson said about the Russians who have interests in Syria and the United States. Let's listen to the Secretary.
By and large, our objectives are exactly the same. How we get there, we each have a view. Maybe they've got the right approach and we've got the wrong approach.
Do the Russians have the right approach?
You can't make that up. You can't make that up. These are the same people that use precision-guided weapons to strike hospitals in Aleppo where sick and wounded people are. This is just, you know, I'm preparing myself mentally to be on this show. I said, John, you're not going to get upset. You're not going to get emotional. But I've met the White Hats. I know what the slaughter has been like. I know that the Russians knew that Bashar Assad was going to use chemical weapons. And to say that maybe we've got the wrong approach? Look, I agonized over voting for or against Tillerson for Secretary of State. Not that I didn't admire his success and all the great things he's done, but the things that he'd said in the past. He has divorced a fundamental of American democracy. The reason why we are the shining city on the hill, as Ronald Reagan used to say, is because they look up to us because of our principles and our beliefs and our advocacy of freedom, for freedom. That's what America is supposed to be all about, not whether they're right and we're wrong. We know who's right and who's wrong here.
Do you regret that vote for Tillerson?
Sometimes I do, but I'm still torn by the fact that the American people chose this president, and he ought to be able to have his team. When Barack Obama won in 2008 and 2009, I voted for his team. because I think that the American people wanted him to have his team. But don't think I wasn't worried about it. Really worried.
Finally, you were just recently in heaven.
So I actually kind of agree. Like I said, I agree with what John McCain was saying at the beginning, that we shouldn't be saying nice things about Putin's approach to Syria, that maybe they have the right approach and we have the wrong approach and Obama had the wrong approach, is what really Tillerson is really saying there, because hundreds of thousands of people have been killed by Russia's surrogate in Syria, or Assad, the leader of Syria. Now Syria is in the middle of civil war. It's basically Russia and Iran and Assad against the rest of the world, as Obama used to say. But even though I agree with McCain on that, he said, Syria is bombing hospitals in Aleppo. Well, and his argument is the United States is this shining city on the hill with all these principles. Well, aspirationally, I agree with that the United States has all these aspirational principles, but you can remember not so long ago, there were some stories on my LiberalViewer Sunday Live Clip Roundups about how the United States ended up bombing a hospital in Afghanistan, a Doctors Without Borders hospital, and there was an investigation, and it turned out it wasn't completely a mistake. They were like trying to send a message or get people who they thought were firing, and I don't know exactly what the deal was with that, but they should have known it was a hospital. So it's not like the United States has never bombed hospitals, and it's not like the United States foreign policy hasn't resulted in mass casualties in the Middle East and many misadventures, not just in the last, not just George W. Bush and doing his invasion of Iraq, or Barack Obama and his drone warfare in the Middle East, and the beginnings of the war in Kuwait that now has Saudi Arabia as our surrogate against the Iran, Assad, Syria bloc. And anyway, I agree with some of the criticisms from McCain of Russia, but I don't think the United States is all that shiny. I think we're better than Russia, and certainly aspirationally and in our best moments, but it's not like we don't have some sins that we also have to atone for. Anyway, that's my clips that I wanted to show you. I hope you appreciate the clips I picked out. I did promise Sandy close-up for the Sandy fans there. This is just before I was starting the show. Here you go. It's a Sandy close-up with the depth effect that the iPhone promises. I don't know, was it all that special? You can let me know what you think down in the comment section. And also thanks to Joanna Rodriguez, who gave a $5 super chat contribution along the way. This is your last chance to click on that $sign and give me some sort of super chat contribution. I apologize that I always mention the money thing, but starting back in April, YouTube took away most of the monetization of my videos, about 90% of it, and in the last month or so it's come back a little bit. I think now it's more like 80% of my monetization is gone, so that's double what it was before, but I'm still much more reliant on the super chat contributions, and of course my patrons on Patreon. There's a link down to my Patreon account down in the video description. If you even want to give $1 or $5, basically YouTube is giving me $10 or $20 per week on these live clip roundups if I'm lucky, and they take about 10 hours every Sunday to prepare, so that's like between $1 and $2 an hour from YouTube, and that's not really cost effective as a use of my time. I have other things I could be doing, and to help me feel like I'm not wasting my time shouting into an empty universe, you can help me with the Patreon contributions, the super chat contributions, or even giving me a thumbs up or a supportive comment in the live comments or as a recorded show. I appreciate all of that, and I also enjoy watching the Sunday shows and giving you my comments and criticism and political analysis and media criticism, whatever you want to call it. So that's one of the reasons I keep doing it, because I wouldn't do it if I didn't like doing it. So there's that as well. And I will be back next Sunday, and for the foreseeable future, I guess, giving my Sunday live clip roundups, and I guess until next week, or until I finally get a chance to make a edited, produced video for those who have been asking for that. Whatever happens, I guess I will be seeing all of you around the internet.